in the UK as well. Employability is one of the key motifs of higher education in the 21st century. It's undeniable that it's an ever-present theme for discussion around higher education and what higher education should be doing. But it's extraordinary how little evidence we have on this topic. If you scour the literature, there are relatively few rigorous empirical studies on the topic. Most of what is said and written about employability is almost entirely impressionistic, about how we feel graduates are today, how they're different from how graduates were yesterday. There's very, very little evidence, and the evidence that we do have is generally based on perceptions, so it's simply a systematization of the impressions that we're sharing anyway. So that's the first challenge we have. It's an empirical one, there's very little evidence. The second is a normative one, and this is an area that we have far too little discussion about, and that's around how employability fits into the broader question of what universities should be doing. Is it really the place of higher education? What kind of employability can and should we be promoting? And these normative questions also have very little exposure. And a lot of the attention goes on relatively easy metrics, which can be very misleading. Just to give you an example, in the UK's recent gauge of graduate employment, the London School of Economics came right down the bottom of all of the institutions in the higher education. But I mean, no one would seriously believe that LSE is the worst place to go in the UK in terms of one's employment and employability. So we have to be extremely cautious with some of the metrics that come out, and that will be one of the themes that I'll be touching on today. I was very pleased to see that in all three of the talks we've had from colleagues at UGC, ACU, World Bank, employability came up, and I very much share the concerns and the emphases raised by those speakers around the critical issue of graduate unemployment and underemployment, but also the fact that universities are not employment factories, and we need to think carefully about what a university is and how it can contribute to this debate. And I'm going to be a little bit more controversial than the previous speakers, because I'm going to question quite strongly whether in fact universities should be promoting employability, at least in the way that it's conventionally framed. Okay, so I'm going to engage firstly with that question. And another assumption that I'm going to try and challenge is, and this is generally held to be self-evident, that employers should be determining what employability is and what our students should be learning. What I will go on to argue is that we should think about employability in much broader terms than this. Or rather, we should think about employability only in the context of the kinds of graduates that more broadly we want to form through our university systems. And the focus will be mainly on undergraduate students, but we might be able to draw out some implications for postgraduate students as well. So employability, in the argument that I'll put forward, needs to be thought of in a much broader sense in relating to personal development and civic development and the contribution that individuals make to society beyond the employers. It's a very complex puzzle, employability. It involves an intersecting layers of education system, labour market, previous experiences. The piece of the puzzle I'm going to focus on today is the university. And I'm not doing that because I think it's the only important area, but I can't do everything in a single talk. And there are lots of important discussions that we need to have about the nature of the labour market, but I'm going to focus on that particular one today. very hard to show that their products are of good quality. It's seen to be something that's self-evident. But those universities with less recognition generally work harder at this and very often have better practice in relation to employment. This wasn't supposed to be a day about rankings, but we can't avoid talking about rankings a little bit in every talk. So here's a ranking relating to employability. There aren't many of these, but QS has an employability ranking, and this in fact is one of the better ones, in inverted commas, in relation to being less reductive. They actually use 5, I believe, different gauges for this, which is partly involves employment outcomes, but also engagement between universities, some more process indicators, and reputation. So some of the previous employability rankings had only gone on reputation. So they simply survey employers and ask them, where would you most like to recruit your new, where would you most like your employees to come from? And then you can rank institutions. And it's quite interesting to see the results here. They're quite different from, I mean, some of the usual suspects are there, but they're quite different from your general, the Shanghai and so forth, world university rankings. There's more national diversity. We've got a couple of Australian universities there, Chinese university and so forth, but some of the usual suspects. So we've spent quite a few minutes talking about employability without really defining what it is. So I'm going to use what in the UK is a very widely accepted definition of employability here. And the first key point is employability is not employment. Okay, so perhaps an obvious point, but being employable does not mean that one has employment or is guaranteed employment, but it's a set of attributes that are conducive to gaining employment. That's the first point. Okay, they put you in a better position of gaining employment, but obviously there are always going to be factors external to the individual that determine whether one actually gets employment. Availability of work being the most obvious, but also factors such as discrimination in the workplace, so people from certain social groups, possibly women, depending on the context, a range of different factors may actually determine whether people actually have access to that employment. But employability is a set of internal characteristics that put one in a good position to get work. But importantly, there are a series of other considerations that are added in here. Being successful at work. So it's not just about gaining employment, but what one does within employment. And the last point that's added in here is about the contributions through one's work. And this is an extremely important point, and one that's very rarely acknowledged in any metrics relating to employability, and only occasionally in debates about it. But to my mind, this is absolutely central to us thinking about what employability is. I'll draw a few times in this talk on Lee Harvey's work, who is, to my mind, the most insightful writer on this topic. And he cuts through some of the confusions about employability, and here he lists a few of the ways in which employability is conceptualized and measured and so forth. So sometimes it's about job type. So graduates are supposed to have graduate level jobs. So some of the discussions around what kind of job counts as a graduate job. Timing is important. We'll come back to this because getting a job quickly is seen to be part of the employability metric. I was having an interesting conversation earlier on in the break around perhaps the importance of thinking more long term. Sometimes it's very hard for people to decide soon what they want to do. Sometimes people only find their real vocation in their calling in life after many years. So that's an area that we might need to have less reductive thinking. Attributes on recruitment, that's now an accepted way. Further learning, so this is, we're starting to come to some of the more progressive conceptualizations of employability that are about learning to learn, and how it's not about arriving necessarily at the workplace with a specific set of skills, but about having the propensity and the ability to carry on learning, and skills, the final point. I'll just give a couple of examples from the work I've done in Africa about concrete employability interventions. So universities are being encouraged to generate some of these qualities And they're doing it in a range of different ways. And I suppose the most obvious way is through careers offices. So careers offices have traditionally had the function, and a very traditional careers office would discuss with current students what kinds of jobs they would like to do and give them information about what opportunities were there. Careers offices now have at least in some universities, have a far more expanded remit. In the countries that I've worked in, the University of Cape Town has probably the best example of a careers office with these multiple functions of providing skills development courses, engaging with employers, running tracer studies, and I was very interested to hear about the national tracer study that's been carried out here in Sri Lanka. But there are a range of other kinds of intervention as well. So this here is the Center for Entrepreneurial Studies, Abeokuta in Nigeria. So this is a specific center to develop entrepreneurship in agriculture. And I won't say too much about this because my colleague Arif is going to talk about this tomorrow. So and I don't have too much to say about this anyway, so I won't steal his thunder. But that's going to be a key discussion tomorrow morning across the two of the talks actually, along with this, which is around institutional enterprise. So this is the actual incubation of startups and so forth, and this is in Kenya. There are a range of other possibilities. Nigeria, in fact, has implemented a compulsory entrepreneurship course for all undergraduate students across the whole country, which has been a very radical venture. Anyone who's actually been to Nigeria would wonder why they need to do this. It's probably the most entrepreneurial country I've ever been to. But they felt it was necessary to do this, such as the emphasis that's been placed on the need for people to generate their own forms of employment and not just rely on existing opportunities. I'm just going to finish this section by saying something about some parallel conceptualizations to employability, one of which is graduate attributes. So this is something that a number of universities have now published statements about the attributes that their graduates should come out with. And I've just listed the ones from the University of Edinburgh, but many, many universities now have similar lists. And they're generally broader than work skills. So they include some of the things that are incorporated in discussions of employability, but also some broader personal qualities and learning, lifelong learning and attention to diversity and a range of things. And these also come into our discussions, as of course do 21st century skills, which we're probably tired of hearing about, but these again, there's a tremendous amount of overlap between these skills that are perceived to be necessary in our contemporary societies, new forms of employment, and there's a lot of overlap, critical thinking, digital literacy and so forth, and some of the character qualities such as resilience to our discussions on employability. Okay, so that's something about what we mean by employability. And as we can see, it's a contested concept. It's conceptualized in very, very narrow ways, just as employment on the one hand, and the whole continuum to the other end, which is around a much broader set of capacities to function meaningfully in work and successfully, okay, and with knock-on effects. So there's a whole continuum of ways we can conceptualize it, and as I said before, very little empirical evidence, and sometimes contested empirical evidence to support what universities are doing and the impact that they have in that regard. But for this middle section of the talk, I'm going to turn to the normative question of whether universities really should be doing this. Having compulsory entrepreneurship courses in Nigeria, incubation hubs, expanded careers services, sometimes compulsory career services, embedding employability development within specific courses, cutting down the number of our actual subject courses to allow room for these things. All these are important decisions taken by universities that reduce the time and resources for other things. Okay, so it's crucial that we are sure we know what we're doing here and whether this is legitimately part of the role of university or whether indeed this would be better carried out by some other kind of institution. And in order to answer this question, I'd just like to start by saying something about what the value of higher education is, generally speaking. To my mind, we can think of higher education as having three forms of value. So if we're saying, well, why would anybody want to go to university? We can think of the answer to that question in three different ways. The first is that it might have intrinsic value. So there is something important simply from being educated, even if it doesn't lead to anything else. Just the fact of being able to understand the world better, to understand oneself better, to have greater knowledge and understanding about a whole range of human endeavor, perhaps to enjoy one specific discipline, whether that's literature or physics or whatever it might be. We can say that there's something of value in that, and I'm sure all of us in this room see our studies, to some extent at least, in that light, that we've been made better people or that we have a better life because we've had that experience of education. So that's one justification, but for most people that is not sufficient. So instrumental value is a key thing for almost everybody. Very few people have the luxury simply to sit back and enjoy the intrinsic fruits of education. So for most people, the instrumental value of higher education is important. And the most important of those in our contemporary societies is the ability to gain employment, particularly valued employment, well-remunerated employment and interesting employment and so forth. But there are a range of other instrumental benefits: better health, better nutrition, more effective political participation. There are a whole host of instrumental benefits of all forms of education, but specifically higher education. But there's a third value that we could see as a subset of instrumental value, and that's what can be called positional value. And this is benefits that accrue to one person relative to another, or the whole set of people. And these are slightly different from the general set of instrumental values, because for some instrumental values we can all have those things at the same time. So we can all become healthier at the same time, and one person's good health is not going to negatively impact on another person. In fact, it's probably going to positively reinforce it. So there are some things that we can all have at the same time. But there are other goods that are rivalrous, and particularly when it comes to valuable employment. In all the societies that I know in the world, there are scarce numbers of valuable employment, of jobs that provide a good remuneration and are enjoyable. So there's going to be competition for those posts. For scarce goods, we then bring into play relative benefit. And that means that, let's say one of us in this room, we've all got secondary leaving certificate. And let's imagine Liberty, she's the first person that goes to university. Okay, so Liberty is the first person in this room, she gets an undergraduate degree. Liberty's opportunities have increased. But ours have not stayed the same. They've actually gone down. Because when we're talking about the competition for scarce goods, some people rising means other people will actually go down their opportunities. They don't stay the same. And this is a crucial aspect of higher education. And I'm going to come back to this later, because some of what counts as employability, not all, but some of it, is simply about that kind of zero-sum competition between people for scarce opportunities. And others is about the instrumental benefit where everybody can progress at the same time. So this is an important distinction for what we'll come back to later. So we had the long drive from Colombo to here, and it was a bit hard after a long plane journey, but it was an enjoyable journey, and Arif and I had a very pleasant conversation in the car, and he impressed on me the importance of having schemes of thought which are memorable, and particularly starting with the same letter. And the four principles that I thought of didn't in fact all start with E, so I had to do some very swift thinking to make them all start with E, and I changed one of them from the original slides that you had. So they are now the 4 E's. So the points that I'm going to go through in turn here are inquiry, ethics, efficiency, and equity. So I will argue that these are the 4 considerations that we need to have. So the first point is to say that employability is obviously of great importance for students who go to universities. There are very few people, there are a few, but there are only a minimal number of people whose opportunities for the rest of their lives are entirely worked out and arranged by the time they come to university. There's some very privileged people that might be the case. But for most people, they are dependent on various forms of striving for the opportunities that they want. And universities clearly have an obligation to their students to support them in that quest. So I think we have a starting point there that employability is of interest in the contemporary world. Whatever we think of the way that the globe is organized, the forms of economy and political situation, political systems that we have. In the contemporary world, young people need to have these employability skills. So there is an obligation of the university to support students in achieving this. However, there are limits and there are conditions on that support. So these 4 points I'd like you to look at in that context. And the first is consonance with the central purpose of the university. And I have looked a little bit back through history. It's a topic I have interest in. And universities have changed a tremendous amount through history, and that's even just the European university, let alone the various forms of higher learning that we've had throughout the world, through Asia, North Africa, Middle East, Central America, and so forth. There are many different forms of institution of higher learning. And it's very hard to derive a specific essence or principle of what the university might be. But I'm convinced by a book, a very interesting book called What Are Universities For by Stefan Collini, who's an English professor at Cambridge. And he at one point in the book, he has this phrase that the governing purpose of universities involves extending human understanding through open-ended inquiry. And for me, this is about as close as we can get to a unifying principle for university. This idea of human understanding, which we achieve both through teaching and through research in different ways, and that it's achieved through open-ended inquiry. I feel this is a strong, it's not a watertight, it's not universal, but I feel this is a strong principle on which we can understand what a university is about. Okay. So my first, and I'm sure you share with me a sense that this is a valuable and a valid purpose of university. So the first point is that employability needs to be consonant with inquiry. And that means that it's about questioning and not just about answering. It's not just about a machine like, the metaphor used earlier this morning, a factory of creating people in a particular kind of mold with a particular set of skills, but about forming, questioning, thoughtful, inquiring people who are able to take that spirit of inquiry to their workplaces. And sometimes that might be awkward for employers, because a critical and inquiring recruit is going to question practices in that workplace. And that may not be what their employers want, but if they're not doing that, then the university hasn't done its job, I would argue. The second point is ethics. Employability needs to be consonant with the ethical obligations of the university and the development of ethics in young people, or not so young, depending what kinds of students we're thinking of. And the caveat here is what you might call company-first employability. So when we're thinking of the kinds of graduates that we want to create as university, we have to think about the individuals, we have to think about their employers and their interests, but we also need to think about the whole of society. And that means through their work practices, what kind of impact do these graduates have on the whole of society? Now, in many cases, companies, public sector organizations, self-employment, there won't be a conflict or tension between those things. We hope that in as many cases as possible, companies and other organizations are working for the good of everyone. But we have to recognize that's not always the case. Very often there are companies that exploit their workers, destroy the environment, engage in deceptive practices. And it's simply not a valid aim of the university to prepare people to go along with that without questioning and challenging them. So graduates need to be formed in a way that their first calling is to their ethical obligations and their obligations to the whole of society, and not just to whoever happens to be employing them at a particular point in time. The third one is efficiency, and I use this in a very, very loose sense. It may not even be the best word, but it did begin with E, so that was had a positive. It had a positive thing in its favour there. What I mean by this is really, what is the best institution to be doing which job at which particular point in time? Okay. A lot of the blame for the problems of graduate employment is placed at the door of the university. And I think some of that blame is justified, but not all of it. And part of the reason that blame's laid at the door of the university is that it's the last, for many people, it's the last thing they've done before they look for work. So it's very easy just to look at the university for the source of all the problems. But clearly that's not the case. Because most of the skills that we've been talking about, the things that the employers are looking for, these attributes of whether it's teamwork or the right kind of attitude or literacy skills, speaking English, these aren't things that one starts to learn at university, of course. They're things one learns as soon as one is able to understand and speak, but particularly developed at school and in many spaces outside university. So we have to think about the other places where people are generating these skills. And again, I'm absolutely not absolving universities from responsibility here, but I think we need to recognize that there are multiple sites in which people generate these kinds of skills. And also that there are some things that can only be learnt within work. Okay. It's simply not possible to learn all of the things that one needs to know to operate in a work environment outside of the work environment. There are many things that you can only learn on the job, as it were, whether it's job-specific things or even some of the qualities, the generic work qualities. Okay. Having said that, universities can do more to open those possibilities. So, of course, one of the key elements here is providing for work experience during university, other kinds of experience outside the university, so people can generate those kinds of skills. But it's important to recognize that there are things that need to be done in the workplace. And the final one of the E's is equity. And I think we need to be extremely careful with our employability provision in universities that we're not exacerbating inequalities in society. We're all fully aware that who goes to university is not something entirely based on impartial, even merit-based criteria. All around the world, those on higher incomes and from particular social groups have a disproportionate chance of going to university, and particularly from elite universities. So there are inequities of access. We're also fully aware that there are inequities in gaining employment afterwards. Even people with the same levels of education, there are disparities in levels of employment and salaries, of course. But the point I want to focus on here is what happens in the middle. And that's relevant here for employability, that there are also disparities in access to the kinds of experience that will enhance our employability. So if we're thinking about enrichment activities, skills development courses, work experience, community volunteering, extra English classes or IT classes, these are all things that people from higher income backgrounds have greater access to than people from lower income backgrounds. So even at the same university studying the same course, depending on one's background, there are going to be disparities formed in how much of these extra things people can have access to. So we've got three stages of these inequities, and we have to be very careful as universities, when we're giving people access to employability enhancing activities, that they're not done in a way that's going to exacerbate those inequalities. For example, that they're not harder for women to access than for men, for example, or only available for those people who don't have to work to pay their way, for a range of these considerations. Okay, this is the final part of the talk, and I'm just going to draw out a few implications now firstly for measuring employability, and secondly for employability practice. And this may seem like a strange way round for looking at these two things, but as we say in the UK, we have to avoid the tail wagging the dog. So sometimes how we measure things ends up determining what we actually do. In fact, more than sometimes, probably most of the time these days. So measurement of employability is very important, and Lee Harvey raises two problems in the way that we think about measurement of employability. The first is that we purport to be providing institutional measurements when we're actually measuring individual things. So he challenges the idea that you would simply aggregate individual employment trajectories and then make a comment about an institution. Some of that information may have a bearing on what the institution's doing, but much of it will only be about individual characteristics and what those individuals were doing beforehand. So that's the first point, having care between individual and institutional factors. And the second is process versus outcomes. Most of what we think of in terms of metrics for employability are about outcomes, and primarily employment. And I'll give an example of those. This is his chart here of the usual linear way that we think about enhancement of employability, that it's something that the university does to the individual gains that employability and then converts it into employment. And to give an example from the UK, you may be familiar with the Teaching Excellence Framework, which is a new measurement. For a number of years, we've had the Research Excellence Framework, or before that, the Research Assessment Exercise that evaluates the quality of research institutions. There's now been added to it a Teaching Excellence Framework, which is supposed to judge the quality of teaching. And it's quite high stakes because there are financial implications here. It's been very controversial in the UK because many people, while they might support good teaching and even measurement of good teaching, don't believe that the metrics chosen do actually reflect that. But certainly the ones that they've chosen relating to employability leave a lot to be desired. So as you can see here, there are two gauges here. We are lucky enough in the UK to have a destinations of leavers from higher education survey, which gives us very useful data on employment trajectories. But the cut-off point it has is 6 months after leaving university. So it's a relatively short time period. And so the gauges that are going forward to the Teaching Excellence Framework are the proportion of graduates after 6 months who are in some kind of employment, and secondly, the proportion who are in what we might think of as graduate employment, and that's based on the official criteria of professional managerial roles. But of course, this is inadequate even as regards employment, of course, because it depends how long people might take to transit into the work they want. But of course, it's a very dubious gauge of what universities are doing. Of course, there might be all sorts of reasons why a university might have high or low levels of employment afterwards that are nothing to do with how well they've prepared people for the labour market. So we have to be extremely cautious. I'm not saying these aren't important. Having this kind of data is exceptionally useful, and there are all sorts of things that we can do with it, and it will give us lots of insights, but it's not a means of judging how well universities are doing in enhancing employability. So just going back to Lee Harvey skills, we have to think also, I'm not saying exclusive, but also about process. So what are the opportunities and the real engagement that students have at university with a range of different practices? And I'll move now finally on to what those practices might be. So we've got another scheme with the same letter here, the 3 C's. The final thing I want to say is about a holistic view of how universities might actually promote employability. And that this needs to be via classroom, campus, and community. Not in their literal senses, but I'll say a little bit what I mean by that. So the first is classrooms, and by this I mean the formal taught part of the course. So one way, an essential way of promoting employability is through the regular taught hours that a student will have in their particular discipline, and the embedding of particular qualities within that. And critical thinking, for example, is an absolutely essential tool for work, but also for life and political participation. And that is something that we can work with in all disciplinary areas for helping students to develop their critical thought, analytical thought, and so forth. But of course, we can also provide class-based instruction around employability outside of general courses. But that's definitely not enough. So we also need to think of the other two layers. The next one is campus, and what I mean by this is the broader learning experiences that students have in university but outside of their taught provision, their formal taught provision. Some of that might be through the careers office, but a lot of the important learning takes place simply with other students. We had the example this morning about Singapore reducing the number of hours in class. That was very interesting. I hadn't heard that before. The interactions that students have with each other, informally, but also within student societies, recreational, artistic, dramatic, sporting activities are also important. There was an excellent survey in the Western Cape in South Africa on graduate destinations and the determinants of those. And as you might imagine in South Africa, race was a key factor in determining employment, and so was the type of institution. But after those two factors, the key determinant of gaining employment and valuable employment was participation in extracurricular activities while at university. It was the factor after those two that was most conducive in volunteering, participation in societies, and so forth. And the final one is community, and I don't mean by this just local community, but learning that takes place outside the university, but facilitated by the university. So this, most importantly, work placements, but also volunteering. And voluntary work is extremely important in this sense as well. And a couple of final points here, that we need to think about employability together with broader civic learning. And this is a quotation from Martha Nussbaum, who writes quite interestingly about universities and citizenship, about the kinds of qualities which universities enable people to gain that they can take to the outside world to create more just and harmonious societies. And I'll put up a quotation from an undergraduate student, and this was something that quite surprised us. So this was a piece of research that we did with undergraduate students in 4 different African countries, and we were trying to understand how they experienced the development of employability while they were undergraduate students. And one thing that really surprised us, very, very pleasantly surprised us, was the importance that university held for them in terms of diversity and living in a society with others and overcoming the divisions that they had grown up with. For many people, university was the first time that they'd ever mixed with different kinds of people, black or white or coloured, as are the categories in South Africa, different income groups. Of course, that's somewhat limited in the higher education system, but there's a little bit of mixing of different income groups. And it really bowled us over the importance that the space of being in a university had for overcoming some of those divisions, learning to see other people as human beings, and thereby taking that out into the wider world. And we do have extensive empirical evidence of how important that experience is for determining people's attitudes in later life, and we saw a little bit about that this morning as well. And the final thing I want to show you is just by way of a heartening example of what can be done even in diversity. We have a tremendous range of constraints in the higher education sector. We have limited resources, all sorts of barriers, conservatism, difficulties of change. But it is possible to do different things. So I just want you to leave you with the example of Ashesi University in Ghana, which has absolutely fantastic practice as a higher education institution. Now, I have to confess that it does have an advantage. It's small, it's compact, it's well-funded, it's a private institution. So it would be very hard to translate some of these things into the context of a large public institution. But I think some of the principles are there, and it does give us an excellent example of what can be achieved, even in a context as Ghana is a very, very difficult work around higher education. So what Ashesi does is it describes itself as a liberal arts college. It provides a very broad curriculum for all students, whether they then specialize progressively through their studies, and they come out with a range of disciplinary specializations, whether it's in engineering or IT and so forth. But they embed within that a very strong program of personal development, civic development, and specifically work-related development. So all students have to do African studies courses, social studies. They also all have to do design and IT, so they're developing a whole range of attributes. They go through a structured 3-year careers program, which is compulsory for all students, that takes them through the basics of CV writing, interviewing, choice of work, functioning within work, work placements. They also have an extensive community volunteering program. And employers are, I don't believe this is a metaphor, they are literally lining up around the corner to employ the graduates in this institution, because they are well-rounded people. They have a strong ethical sense and very well suited to the world of work. So there are some really inspiring examples of what can be done even in a very low resource base, and in a way that doesn't simply prioritize the gaining of employment at all costs, and does think about the contribution that the graduates are making not only to themselves and to their employers, but also to the broader society, and to give back for what is, let's face it, for most of our societies, a tremendous privilege to go to university, because it's a minority of people, and there is a certain debt that students need to repay, not a financial one, but a debt of work and a contribution to the whole of society. And if we can think of employability in that expanded way, then I feel it will be an important goal for our universities to work for. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. McEwan, for your excellent speech. Why I said excellent speech? Because you took us in a different path compared to the 3 previous speakers. And you said the higher education is going beyond employability. That is one of the statements that you made. And also it was, your presentation is sort of philosophical, as well as there were certain practical aspects put into your presentation. But also at the same time, but you tried to argue with your 4 E's. Employability is a valid aim if the 4 E's, that is inquiry, ethics, efficiency, and equity, are fulfilled by the higher education institutes. So I think with those thoughts, our audience must be having lots of things to ask from Dr. McEwan. I would like to now open the floor for discussion. Please. Yes, Anand.
Thank you very much for the very educational presentation. I just would like to ask, I was very interested in your explanation to say these learning spaces. One is a space in the classroom, the campus, and the community, and also considering these citizenry attributes, civic attributes, and so on, social responsibility. I think it is a very important thing that we need to really incorporate in our educational schemes as well, to be socially responsible, and also to provide these spaces, classroom, university, and community. Could you kindly explain the kind of ways and means, the strategies that you adopt to provide these learning spaces to the students? Thank you.
Thanks very much. Sadly, doing this effectively does require a degree of resource. I mean, I think one of the very, very difficult things we have, and I don't think anybody has an easy solution to this, one of the real challenges we have globally in higher education is that we're trying to extend it, to an ever larger proportion of the population, and that's entirely just, and we need to do that. But it's very expensive to do that. And we can't always rely on people's own personal funding to achieve that. So what ends up happening is that for the, as we reach the final frontier, as it were, we're doing that in an ever cheaper way. So we're finding new affordable ways of extending higher education, whether it's through distance mode or through, what are sometimes called no-frills institutions. I don't know if there are too many of those in Sri Lanka, but in some parts of the world, we've got a new breed of teaching-only institution which has none of the normal trappings of the university, just a few scattered classrooms and very, very minimalist preparation. I work extensively in Brazil, and Brazil is one of the world leaders in this kind of provision, and 75% private, and most of those for-profit. And you'll have little universities in shopping centres and everywhere where people will just come in after work for a few hours in a classroom, then go away, and there's nothing else there. And this is a real dilemma, because of course we want to expand higher education to as many people as possible, but unfortunately some of the new ways that's being done will cut out some of this broader holistic learning that are contained in these 3 Cs. Because, if you only have that no-frills model, you are only having the first of the Cs to start off with. You've just got classroom, and even that is a very, very pared-down classroom. So what we need to think about with the talk provision is embedding some of these things within regular learning. I was involved in citizenship education for many years at schools level, and there is another kind of dilemma there where it's debates over whether citizenship should be a standalone subject or should be integrated into all things. And there are arguments on both sides, because if you have something integrated, then maybe nobody will do it. But if you have it as a standalone subject, then maybe people think that they only need to worry about it in that space and not elsewhere. So it's the same thing with employability in universities, I think. Some institutions have gone for a standalone course, maybe delivered by a careers office or some other, skills development course, but then the rest of the university experience is absolutely insulated from that. So I think ideally we'd like to think of these things being embedded in all areas. And of course it is hard for, us as lecturers always to do that. Some things are easier than others, some things are very difficult, but I think at the very least, things like problem solving, critical thinking, teamwork, these are things that we can do without too much difficulty in all of our classrooms, and most of us would probably think that it would be part of being a good teacher anyway, So there are certainly things that we can do within talk courses. The campus dimension of it, again, this is the one that's most difficult for us to recreate in resource-starved contexts. You know, if you're in a leafy campus university in the United States, then you will naturally have access to all of these things that will provide a very enriching learning experience throughout the years that you're at university. And it's a wonderful experience, a very memorable, enjoyable, rich experience of broader learning. And we really need, from an equity perspective, we need to try and provide those kinds of opportunities for those who aren't in such privileged institutions. But it is a struggle to do that. At the very least, we need to provide some spaces for students to associate and to create different kinds of organizations. And students will do that. I mean, all of us working in universities here, students create their own learning opportunities if they have the opportunity to do that. So it's not that all of these things need to be provided for them. But they do need to have that space to associate. Careers provision, which will come in that second C, that is something that universities can pay a lot more attention to in developing a more holistic provision. And finally, work placements and volunteering opportunities. Now, of course, this does depend quite significantly on the other organizations. In the countries I was working in Africa, there were difficulties sometimes in persuading companies to take people on or to take it seriously, even to give any work or the right kind of work to people. So, but also, you know, the onus is on universities as well for not engaging strongly enough with employers. So I think there's work needed on both sides, and also volunteering opportunities to give those kinds of experiences too.
Yes, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. McJowan, for your thought-provoking presentation. And I am Dr. Saumilinge, representing University of the Visual and Performing Arts. I have a little comment rather than a question. The idea of employability has been a key term in our universities for the last few years. Due to certain projects, grants, and ideas came through higher education ministries and other operatives. However, in your presentation, you pointed out 3 E's, which are very much important to consider when you think about the employability of an undergraduate. So I really appreciate what you have put forward in this forum, because for the last few years I have seen in our university sector that due to this word, this idea, or the notion of employability, we as academics, we have ruined our curriculums. Basically, just integrating all sorts of relevant as well as irrelevant modules, courses, things that we know and we don't know. So we try to integrate everything into our courses, despite the fact of what we teach and the philosophy of our discipline, etc. So we started doing sort of that kind of things. And I really appreciate your intervention here, putting forward these kind of ideas. We cannot solve this complicated problem of employability through just for giving 4 years of undergraduate education. It's a bigger question, and as you have already pointed out, there are so many stakeholders who are responsible for this matter. So I kindly request our academics to rethink about this matter, and I look forward to discuss this matter further. Thank you.
Any comment or any other questions? Yes, Manglesh.
Thank you very much for that good presentation. It's necessary for our especially graduates. In our country, especially one of the reasons that graduate unemployment is graduate preference. Most of the graduates, especially humanities and social science graduates, prefer public sector employment, as well as parents also prefer public sector employment because of the status and job security, and graduates are not ready to commit to challenges. I feel that even one university can't change the graduates' attitude during the 4 years. I hope it's from the school level, and that parents can change the attitude of the students, as well as it is only, I hope, the solution for the problem of employment of graduates. Otherwise, they will be on the road always. It is an issue for a country. Okay.
Yes, please. Extreme corner.
I'm Hemanti Ranasinghe from the Dean of the Faculty of Graduate Studies, University of Sri Jawadanapura. I think I really appreciate the talk about the employment, because that's the talk of the town. And well, taking into consideration all the views that was expressed, I think that universities really have to think again of the courses that they offer. Because what we do is that we design courses thinking that these courses will be useful and in giving the knowledge, skills and attitudes for the students. And once the course is completed, the graduates have to fight to take employment, to search for employment. So what I think we have to do is that we're talking about a lot of collaborations, cooperations with the industry, because we have to think about the prospective employers first, and then design courses in collaboration with them, so that well, they will be a very important stakeholder in the development as well as the offering of the course, so that before the course is over, there would be a lot of opportunities for the students by way of internships, volunteerism, and other aspects where they get in touch, they get the exposure of the world outside. And therefore, once they finish, they don't have to really search for employment most of the time, because they'll be integrated. The good ones will be integrated to the respective industry. So I think the universities have to rephrase the courses, because we always think, and especially in certain disciplines, not so much science, that we have to give the best, we have to give a lot. And like the previous speaker said, integrate everything, anything and everything. No, it's not the case. We really have to look at the client who will take our graduates and design courses accordingly, so that student doesn't have to be the guinea pig. Thank you.
I think we have already completed the 15 minutes discussion time. Do you have any more questions or comment? We can accommodate one, the last one, if you have any. If not, I would like to conclude the session by thanking Dr. McCohen for your thought-provoking, excellent presentation. Thank you very much.
pointed speech and discussion in the concluded session, let me invite Professor Ranjit Vijayawardena, the chairman of CVCD, to give away a token of appreciation to the honored speakers. Dr. Tristan McCoy, so please accept this gift along with our gratitude. Professor Lakshman Vizayanaike, so please be kind enough to accept the gift. Informative speeches were delivered and discussions were done since morning with the theme of changing the higher education landscapes in Sri Lanka. Now's the time to go for a panel discussion to clarify the theme further. So, this invitation is for Professor Anand Vijayawardena, the Vice Chancellor of University of Moytur, to take the seat of the moderator, and Professor Deepthi Bandara, the Director, Quality Assurance and Accreditation Council, University Grants Commission, Professor Gamini Senanayake, the Vice Chancellor of University of Ruhuna, Professor Colin Peiris, the Director, Quality Assurance, Sri Lanka Institute of Technology, Mr. Rajendra Tyagaraja, the Chairman of Congress Bank, are invited as the panel members of the group discussion.
Very good afternoon to all of you. We are changing our usual pattern of having long talks and then moving into this panel discussion with 4 resource persons. The theme for this panel discussion is the challenge or challenges and opportunities in the changing landscape in higher education in Sri Lanka. To support, to contribute to this panel discussion, as it was informed, we have here with us Professor Deepthi Bandara, very close to me, and then we have Professor Gamini Senanayake, Vice Chancellor, University of Ruhuna, Professor Colin Peiris, Sri Lanka Institute of Information Technology, and Mr. Rajendra Tyagaraja, Cargill's Bank. And I think it is my duty to introduce very briefly the panel. Professor Deepthi Bandara is a senior professor in agribiology from University of Peradeniya. She has 25 years experience in higher education quality development, expertise in curriculum development, teaching methodology and staff development, and currently she is the Director, Quality Assurance and Accreditation Council of the University Grants Commission. Then we have Professor Gamini Senanayake. He's a senior professor in agribiology from University of Ruhuna. He has 39 years of experience in higher education, former Deputy Vice Chancellor of University of Ruhuna, and currently the Vice Chancellor. Next we have Professor Colin Peiris. He's a senior professor, Director Academic Development and Quality Assurance, Sri Lanka Institute of Information Technology, Emeritus Professor, University of Peradeniya, and also the Council Member, Asia Pacific Quality Review Council. He has held the post of Founder Director, Quality Assurance and Accreditation Council in UGC, Founder Secretary, Slancy, Quality Assurance Specialist, 2 World Bank projects earlier, IRQE and HTC project, representative director boards in APQN 10 years and INQAHI 3 years, all these international quality assurance bodies, recipient of 2 international quality assurance awards, national consultant as well as international consultant in quality assurance in Bangladesh, Pakistan and India, and also served 4 government recognized non-state university institutions in Sri Lanka, SITEM, Horizon Campus, NSBM and SLIT. But you also have Mr. Rajendra Tyagaraja. He is Deputy Chairman of the Cargill's Bank and also Chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, and is having excellent experience in employing our graduates, and he will be able to give a very good profile identification and analysis of the quality of the graduates for employability and also to meet the challenges. So with this introduction, I would like to move into the subject. I think this morning we very clearly heard, all of you have a very good understanding of the changing landscape of higher education. We listened to Dr. Newman talking about the world scenario, and then Dr. Harsha Tirupana talked about the changing landscape of higher education in Sri Lanka. And all of us now, I think, have a very good understanding about the changing landscape that we experience both in Sri Lanka and in the world. I think perhaps this panel discussion, perhaps we will concentrate to Sri Lanka because I think it is what is relevant now today for the audience and also perhaps the panelists as well. And how I would like to structure this discussion is basically I will give about 5 minutes for each panelist to, in general, talk about the challenges. Now we identified perhaps the trends this morning, and now we need to identify the challenges and how to face these challenges and also opportunities as well. So may I invite first Professor Deepti Bandara to share your views, 5 minutes, in this aspect of challenges and opportunities of Sri Lankan higher education system. You can decide. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to be here. So I think Professor Jayawardena is going to be strict and give me only 5 minutes. Since we are talking about the higher education landscape for Sri Lanka, I would just like to highlight some of the things that we are taking through the UGC. As you know, we've had 2 big World Bank sponsored projects in the IRQE and HETC, and the quality assurance component in higher education was floated around 2014, and I think almost all our academics and administrative staff are very much aware about this concept. So right at the moment, what the UGC is doing is through the project we have developed a tool to actually review the institutes of the state universities in Sri Lanka, which is 15. And we've also developed another tool to review the programs that are launched by these 15 state universities. And we, unlike in the last 10 years, it's a little bit more structured now. And we have written to all the vice chancellors about the higher education review process till 2022, and therefore we have given all 15 state universities as to when they would be reviewed for their institution. And this year we have 4 universities, Sri Jayawardenapura, Rajarata, the University of Visual and Performing Arts, and the Uwawellassa University under review. So I think they are preparing very much, and we look forward to the reviews in November. Also, last year it was announced that since, as you saw, the faculties of social science and humanities are the ones where we have the most number of students and the ones who are, least employed as a percentage maybe, that the first round of program reviews should be given to the faculties of social science and humanities. So this year we have 41 programs under review, and they're actually taking place right now. It's a Herculean task for the UGC to do that. But we've opened up opportunities for all academics who are eligible to be a reviewer to join us. And so they are now, they have gone through the self-evaluation reports of these programs, and within, from September to end of November, they are visiting the site. So by the end of the year, we will also know how these 41 programs in social science and humanities are doing. Leaving those reviews aside, however, I would like to get back to what Tristan said, that I also believe that whatever comes through this review, still we have a responsibility to produce inquiry-based, ethical, efficient, and equity-conscious graduates, and to add what Arif said, that they also get engaged in national and international development. So we will see how it goes. I would now like to get back to Saumya's question a little while ago, in that sometimes we are asked at universities to include this module, that module, and different modules. And I would like to agree with him also that when a university or a program undertakes a certain program, that they do have a certain concentration in a particular discipline, and therefore that they have to match up to certain benchmarks. So the UGC has now undertaken an exercise called benchmark formulation for the next decade, and we are now deciding on what benchmarks we actually want to develop for Sri Lanka. Of course, there are other benchmarks in the UK, in the USA, Australia, and so forth. So we really do not have to reinvent the wheel and have Sri Lankan benchmarks. But then I guess they have to be somewhat Sri Lankanized, considering our educational situations and the status of our country. We've gone through a lot of turbulence and so on. So we will see how that also goes. And then the other one is that through the project, we also developed the Sri Lanka Qualification Framework. It was actually launched in 2013, and we now have an updated version of September 2015. Now, we did ask the universities to send us where do their programs belong, to which category, starting SLQF 5 upwards. Now, I'm not very happy the way that that they are being placed, because I have a feeling that if a particular program is to be at a certain level, it should be done by an independent authority who really knows what they're doing, as to why they are putting a particular degree to a particular level. As it is now, I find that, okay, somebody decides engineering is at 7 and technology is at 5. And I ask, okay, what mechanism did you use? And they don't come up with something like that. So this is a challenge, and it's a challenge for the universities to make sure that their programs lie at a particular SLQF level, which goes with what they give. So I don't think that a group of people should decide what it is. Of course, everybody should be participating, as to say this is why. Because when you are aligning your programs to the SLQF, there are certain SLQF outcomes that we are expecting, and if you can satisfy that your program is going with those outcomes, yeah, you'll be aligned to that particular level. So that's another challenge I think you need to think about. And the research component, of course, we do have certain research awards given, presidential research awards given, and so on. So I have a feeling, even though we do not take, put in a lot of work into undergraduate research and get them involved in research of our academia, that some research is going on. But I also think that how come that some of our graduates have so much time to be on the roads and in processions? How come that they cannot be engaged in research in the faculty? So that's another challenge we need to think about. And also, through my career as a university teacher, almost as much as Gamini, 38 years to be exact, I've seen teachers who taught me and whom I have taught and are now my colleagues who have wonderful ways, brilliant ways of teaching. And I am yet to see a university or the University Grants Commission coming up with an exercise as to how to appreciate them. So I'm thinking of something as to how Tristan said earlier, the teaching excellence framework is a little bit beyond us at the moment, but to come up with some method as to how we can identify and appreciate certain programs or certain universities who come up with good teaching methodology, teaching learning methodology actually, and assessment strategies so that we actually target these attributes that are needed in our graduates. So with that, I think I went past 5 minutes. Yes. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Professor Deepthi Bandara, for giving that introduction on challenges and opportunities and what actions you are taking in terms of the quality assurance in higher education. Can I now request Professor Gamini Siranayake to talk about your expertise and also limit for 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. For me, as the academic administrator, I would like to talk a little more specific issues rather than the general things. I think the universities, to change our higher education landscape, there are many red tapes, barriers. One is, I think, being the state sector universities, the accountability is one of the big problems. This is with staff as well as the students. Even the students, they should know that it's taxpayers' money that we are using. But not only the students, even their parents, they don't care. Because once the student enter to the university, if they enter to the private university, of course their parents will be behind them because the parents are paying for that. But in the state sector, the parents, they are not, I mean, in this Eastern culture, parents can make a big influence to the students or the children, but it's not happening. And so parents think that my student is now grown up and a university student, we are not in a position to advise them and guide them. But in Sri Lankan education system, up to the university level, students are behind this, the parents are behind the students, taking them to the private tuition classes and always taking decisions on behalf of the their children. And so the children, whether they, even though they are grown-ups, but they are lack of decision-making process. So I think that is one of the big problems that we are facing. And the other thing is, with respect to the academic staff also, I must say that in our system, our job is secured in the state sector. Therefore, we will get the salary at the end of the month. So the accountability is a big problem, not like in private sector. I must thank to take up the issue that the Dean Dental Faculty Peradenia regarding this tier system. I think those are the things that we should introduce, performance-based salary scheme. And, but I know that it's very difficult to introduce such things in the state sector. I know that even the UGC chairman didn't tell the real truth, I believe, because I know the situation he has faced in introducing this type of schemes. And the other thing is, important thing for a university, I think as we said that we started most of our universities as undergraduate teaching universities, and we are trying our level best to convert it to the now research universities, which we have done to a certain level, and next step is to develop it into the entrepreneurial universities. In that respect, we have to commercialize our research findings. But still in the country, we don't have such a mechanism to commercialize our research. I know that in my university we have tried lot of, we tried many times to commercialize certain research. One reason is I must put the blame to a certain extent to the private sector. because in our country the private sector mainly they import and sell, but they don't promote the our local production. So I think we have to have a link with the universities and the private sector through a technology transfer office to develop the intellectual properties in the university and make it a commercial product by the private sector. I think that is the most important thing to we have to link with the private sector and the university. I think I have passed. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Gavin Senanayake. Certainly you will get further opportunities to respond, and thank you for giving that perspective. We have Professor Colin Pieris, and Professor Colin Pieris will be able to talk on behalf of the non-state higher education sector and also the quality aspects and how he thinks how to meet these challenges and opportunities in the higher education sector. Professor Colin?
Thank you, Professor Jayawardena. Very good afternoon to all of you. It's a great opportunity to meet all my friends in the quality circle in public universities. I was in the public university for 33 long years, now representing the non-state sector. Well, just to tell you a few things about, I have a lot of experience now with the private sector also. We used to call non-state sector in the country. And the title says the challenging higher education landscape in Sri Lanka. Yes, it is changing. Higher education landscape in Sri Lanka is changing, and the non-state sector is contributing a lot. Let me share a few things about the non-state sector in the country, and also at the same time, there are certain challenges and opportunities for our non-state sector at the moment. Now, the most important thing is, I think all of us know very clearly, we are in the public sector, we are not in a position to accommodate all the students who get through the A-level exam. At the moment, the non-state sector is contributing a certain portion of that vacuum. Now, according to our present statistics, nearly 10,000 students are admitted into our private sector or the non-state sector at the moment. Now, not only that, again, that very recently, 2 years back, we formed an association called SLANGSHI, Sri Lanka Association for Non-State Higher Education Institutes. As soon as we formed that SLANGSHI, we wrote proposals to the government in order to assist the government in higher education sector. Now, out of those proposals that we have sent, 2 were approved. I think most of you know that. We are very proud to say that now, for the first time in the country, here, the interest-free loan scheme activity was now launched, and those who are not able to get into universities those who have sat for the A-levels in year 2015, so we have exposed this whole exercise, and nearly 1,000 students out of that lot will get into the recognized non-state institutes in November. So that number is around 1,000. So that is, again, that you can see how much of effort by the non-state sector that we are contributing to our higher education. Not only that, the second project approved by the government was the education sector for our teachers, because there were certain vacuum in our education sector in the country because we didn't have enough teachers, especially in the rural areas, and we have developed a system or a technique and also proposal in order to train our students either in 2015 or 16, those who have not selected, in order to go into this teaching profession. So likewise, the non-state sector is doing a lot of things into that. And so these are just a few more things that I want to share with you. And also in your case now today since in the morning, we are listening to various other issues that you have challenges. In order to meet those challenges, actually, just to say that already the non-state sector has taken some action and also various things. Let me take one example. Now even we have, just now we talked about that the research at the moment is little slow in our the private sector, but now we have taken a lot of decisions in most of these non-state sector institutes to provide assistance, financial assistance, and at the same time to link again the promotions with research output. Not only that, the salaries or the remuneration that they are getting at the end of the month is linked to these research outputs. So if you do more research, that you get more salary. Not only that, in the non-state sector, they are giving bonuses. In one institute, I don't want to name those, one institute is giving 12 months bonus for their employees. One critical factor is the research output. And also not only that, again, there are other things. So they are really motivated. So I don't know whether these things we can apply in public sector, because there is a fund generation and certain places are not for profit. Whatever they earn, they will put back to the institute and also to do various other things. So likewise, there are certain things that we have already taken into that. And in opportunities, I think all of you know, we don't have that much of restrictions, no red tapes, no UGC to say this and that, but even in certain cases, we will follow all the rules and regulations of the UGC for various things. And also, in the non-state sector, we have a flexibility of introducing new degree programs, simply because we are in a competitive nature. We have competition among our institutes, and also we have to get our students. In order to get that, we have to change our curricula. And not only that, that we have to do it in a nice way. So all demand-driven courses are available in non-state sector. This is one important thing. Then the employability of graduates. Well, I was in the private sector for 4 different locations, and it is almost everyone is getting a job, because we give them a right training, not only the subject matter. Now here, I don't want to compare public and private. I will say what we do at the non-state sector. Not only the curricula for a particular degree, but we will add a lot of other important things in order to develop their personal development and preparatory, graduate preparatory courses. So what will happen, once they go out into the system, they are well-molded student with a graduate. Presentation skills and various other joint work, they can do a lot of things. So likewise, there are certain things are there. And also the graduate employability that we are dealing with the private sector very much, and incubation centers are located inside universities, the non-state the institutes. So the private sector people are working there, and our students, they have the opportunity of dealing with all these people time to time. That's another thing. And also non-state participation with our Slangshi organization, it is immense. At the moment that we have around 10 members, those who were recognized by the government. So once we get more and more people, we will be very strong and we can do a lot of things. And some challenges are also there, like in the private sector, there is no issue on those things. Again, the quality assurance. Now through this Slangshi, that we have taken a decision to help each other. So that may be the reason that I am so demanded by various institutes. So I go here, there, and to work 1 year and go to another place, because I have to set up all the quality assurance requirements in all these non-state sector. That is little slow, but we will do that. And also very recently that we have introduced academic audit. It is little serious, so you have to go into every detail and see what they do, and also then and there, in Senate or any other places, that we will discuss everything. We put everything on the table and discuss and take decisions accordingly. And not only that, that we are trying our best to get more foreign students. We don't have any restrictions, that we are working very hardly with various other government organizations to bring them in, and some institutes are doing very well. And only the challenge that we have is the formalities that we have to follow in terms of their visas and various other issues. So we are trying, through this association, we are trying our best to get all these things into a correct place. And another important thing is, at the moment we noted that in Sri Lanka, these donor agencies, those who are giving research grants, limited only to public universities. So we had a lot of discussions with NSF, CARP, and NRC, and all these things to see, give us also an opportunity to do research and do that, because we have a lot of other good people in our universities, and we had a good discussion with our World Bank, with Slangshi, and I think in the coming project that there is some provision for non-state sector to compete with grants. Not only that, one other major challenge that a lot of people in the institutes are now developing new programs, and to get the approval, it takes little extra time. It takes a lot of time sometimes. So this is one of the biggest challenges that we have. We have to wait at least 1 year, sometimes that we have in order 2 years to wait until to get the final approval from the Minister of Non-State Sector of the Higher Education.
So we will give some opportunities later on in the discussion.
Okay, right. Yeah, so I think the time is up. Yes. There are a lot to share, because we have heard about that. But the other thing is, one final thing, sir, that a lot of public sector professors are coming to our universities for their sabbatical. That was a very, very pleasing thing that we want to share with you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. No, thank you, Professor Colin Pires, for sharing that private sector perspective. Thank you. And we are very interested to listen to Mr. Tyagaraja bringing in the private sector perspective. Mr. Tyagaraja.
Thank you, Ananda. Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I accepted this invitation to come from Colombo, just drive up here for the hour or so and go back for two reasons. The first is, wearing the hat as the chairman of the oldest chamber of commerce, the Ceylon Chamber, I thought it's good to reflect the perspective from the private sector on how we see education, and in particular higher education. And secondly, I'm sure the chairman of the UGC may not be aware, but that my family had something to do with contributing something towards your headquarters, because where you live in what place is our ancestral home, which we gave in 1974. So we are very honored and happy to be here. Just a perspective, before I get to the private sector, if I can pick on a couple of, they came towards the tail end of the previous session, and if I can just pick a couple of things which were shared during Q&A. I think, Ananda, you mentioned something about how do we create these community spaces, I think, to the previous speakers and wanted ideas. I think the answer is in your hands. It's in the hands of, I would say, everyone here. You, for one, I think you have the privilege of being as an independent director of the largest bank in the country. So there you have a wonderful space to engage with their CSR team or whatever it is, from experiences to whatever it is you can craft in what way you want to do. But in addition to you, I think there are various folks, and if you look at the locations of the universities, whether it is, for example, Peradeniya. I know Peradeniya, in addition to the science, you produce some of the oldest in the arts. If you look at geography and history, for example, you have Peradeniya Gardens. If you really want to get into community engagement, you can actually form groups to go and participate in the community there. You have a world-class a district hospital there if you want to get into volunteerism. So the opportunities are there. The reason I'm saying that is being in the private sector, we get engaged from some part of you. Recently I had the opportunity of making a guest lecture on the Belt and Road Initiative at Srijavadanapura for the MBA. So I think then from Jaffna I get from time to time we get invitations, and I don't think anybody from the private sector will ever say no if one reaches out. That's the important point. There was some, I think the lady mentioned a comment about we probably don't have the resources for the framework on excellence in teaching. But I'm not sure as to how many of you are aware of a program which was launched last week by a coalition between the USAID, the Ceylon Chamber, and a couple of other NGOs branded You Lead. It is a $13 million US project running over 4 years, identifying this very problem, broken into two segments, to look at the ones who don't have the opportunity of going to universities, the school leavers, and also at the university level. How do you build capacity and make your the output relevant to what the country needs? Now, what they mean by you lead is not shoving something down the throats of people what they don't want to know, but what they mean for us as private sector is you take the lead and shape something with them and craft something which is relevant to you. Now, the other thing I would also say is I heard various comments about the curriculum. We need to have curriculum to be relevant to the country. And what I'm going to say now is of no malice to anyone. It's just from an outsider's perspective. You know, we have a current serving Prime Minister who from the late 70s, when he was, I think, in charge of vocational training and education, he kept on talking just one thing with 3 words, the triple E: economy, employment, and education. So the tone at the top, in terms of relevance, I personally believe is there from a framework point of view. And you here, as an August group here, I think it's within your control to decide how you want to spend that money. There was also I hope what I'm going to say is not a bitter pill, but I'm going to say what I have to say, because we value your output, right? There was somebody, one gentleman stood up and said, no, you can't shape thinking of these children when they come into university. I did some homework before I came here. I'm told that when you produced, I think in 2016, the numbers which I got was that 17% of all students who were eligible to get into university got actual entrances. And I was told that that year, the spend on higher education was $46 billion, which is $3 billion, right? I presume that you as a group have some say in how that money is allocated and spent. Now, if you feel that the mindset has to be changed of parents before the children come into, why can't we ask for a small part of that and educate the parents during induction week? Can I give you an example, because I can see slit here. Representing the private sector, I had the opportunity of working with the apex body of ICT, SLASCOM, and we went and addressed the University of Jaffna about, I think, a year and a half ago. And again, while ICT is one of the top 5 sectors identified as exports, as one of the gentlemen woke up and said, that may not be in the agenda of the parents, because what goes through the dining room is a pensionable government job or a job in a bank. I've been in banking for 30 years, so I know this story. But there is only a limited amount the government can generate as jobs or banks. And I think there is, and one thing which we did there was with the apex body, with SLASCOM, we said, before you guys try to engage the students to come and do ICT, go and do a couple of seminars for parents, bring them into the University of Jaffna and tell them that it is not a shameful thing to do a vocational training or a degree in ICT. So I think the mindset change has to be done, but I think it takes 2 to tango. And I would just like to make one comment to the gentleman who looked at me, or I think looked at this way and said the private sector needs to do more. I now come to the probably tail end of my active commercial banking career, so I remember the time now. but I now belong to a much larger group which believes in Sri Lanka. Let me tell you, sir, I'm part of a group which has 3 pillars: agri and dairy, supermarketing and banking. And for those who have come from the UK, the equivalent of my supermarket group, which is Cargill's Food City, is not your Robinsons or Waitrose, it is your Sainsbury's, looking at the bottom 40%. And let me tell you, sir, as of today, 8 out of 10 items in those shelves are grown, processed, or made in Sri Lanka. And we go to the last mile in terms of agri and dairy. We cut the middleman, we go to the farmer, because we believe in Sri Lanka. And I just want to leave one comment on there, because maybe that will stimulate some discussion, because there is this issue which says that, so yes, we are producing something, and then there is employability issue. So let me tell you what our group, I'm not talking about Ceylon Chamber, the Cargills as a group decided to do. Because we have the same problem about the relevance and what is put out. So those of you who may have looked at the Sunday Observer maybe a week and a half ago would have seen a full-page advertisement calling for 500 trainees, management trainees. You are probably going to look at 1,000 and then shortlist 500 from any discipline, including, I was very keen, visual arts, Don Horton Place, because I'm mindful that somebody who might be a mathematician may not be as creative as a guy with visual arts. So we want that. But what we are looking for is agnostic to a discipline, the right attitude and the right aptitude to go through a 2-year program, regardless of whatever degree you have. You have to be prepared to go through this. I wouldn't call it a national service, but it's a cleansing process where that chip on the shoulder is removed, and if you come out of it successfully, you make the grade. The reason I'm saying that is this franchise has 25 KFC outlets, and the guy who heads it now started as a floor cleaner, right? And this, I think, in the supermarket chain, it is probably the only vocation where you can start as a stacker and end up as a store manager in 5 years. But for that, it's not just the 3 letters, the right attitude and the right aptitude to go after it. So I think that's very, very important. And here, ladies and gentlemen, we didn't say country is not producing, what do we do? So we said we will recruit regardless of any discipline, and we will invest. And I can tell you, we are working with the University of Arizona, who is here at the moment as part of ULEAD, to shape that curriculum, which will be a combination of practical experience during 2 years and academia, modular-based, where you keep on earning. As you pass each module, you graduate to get an accreditation. So I hope that gives a different perspective as to how the private sector looks and welcomes good quality output. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sagarada, for bringing this employer's perspective. I will structure this, the balanced part of the panel discussion by asking one question each, perhaps from each panelist, and then we'll open up for the questions from the audience. Professor Deepthi Bandara, you basically mentioned about mainly the quality assurance aspect of higher education, right? Your new directions, new programs that you're going to introduce, the action plan, and also some of the challenges that you have in implementing that. And I just would like to know, I mean, we talked about this quality, very important aspects if you go for world-class systems, in fact. And so what we need to consider is that how do you now, from the Quality Assurance and Accreditation Council, from the University Grants Commission, how do you consider this in terms of broad-basing our education, in terms of accessibility enhancement, expansion, and also in terms of getting private sector on board. Now, Professor Colin Peters indicated that they have their own quality assurance systems and things like that, and there is one coming up, actually, the National Quality Assurance System, and so I'm sure that there can be challenges. And how do you plan to make sure that this is a challenge for the state sector as well, and the criticism for the private sector in some organizations, that there are well-developed private sector higher education systems as well. From your perspective, how do you face these challenges of the quality assurance in an overall setup, so that you have this public confidence, the confidence in the parents that they don't have any issue in sending their children to these kind of non-state higher education institutions, and also to see how best the quality assurance can be used to expand accessibility? Professor Bandar?
Thank you, Prof. So I would like to say, to begin with, in the program reviews which is going on, we have an 8 criteria evaluation, and it goes from program management to curriculum development to course development to student support, student awards, and healthy and innovative practices. So I would think that by the end of the year, when we get the 41 evaluations of our humanities and social sciences, we'll be very fortunate if at least 10% would come up with an A. Because I have a feeling that when those manuals were developed, it was a 5-member, very eminent professors who developed those manuals. They looked into higher education throughout the world and came up with standards which are not actually, from Stanford or Harvard or Yale, but which should be expected from anything in Southeast Asia or South Asia. So I think what we are aspiring to do is to maintain standards at least in the region. So if at the end of the year we find that the social science and humanities fall short miserably, then of course we need to take quick action as to what we are going to do. So the 4 institutes which have 10 criteria as to how they are performing, starting again from governance and management all the way down to quality assurance, innovative practices, and so forth. These both institutional as well as program reviews will give us an idea as to the total educational experience that the programs and the institutes are providing for the students who have, come into the universities through a very competitive examination. Whether we are giving them a raw deal here, or whether, as you say, the parents feel it's fine to send my child to a state university. Because I still feel that, and it was told at yesterday's meeting with the 25 top employers in our country, I was at the meeting, that the state university graduates are still superior in their knowledge. It's just that they cannot sometimes apply this practically, and all of them, just about all of them, said that their attitude is not what they expect. So something must be wrong with our attitude too in the state universities, because we are teachers, we are mentors, we are subject experts, we are supposed to be role models. And so where are we going wrong? I think part of it probably lies with us, because these students, when they are coming in at 19, a very impressionable age, and we can make it or break it. So we need to take a very good look at what we are giving in the state universities. After all, I still believe that the best human resource potential lies with the state university. There is no doubt about it. You can take any non-state higher education institute, and I can challenge at any time that they could not match ours. So I think we can still turn it around. We can still turn it around, and that with the World Bank Ahead program, which is coming, we can, make a good start with the results that we are getting through these reviews. And we know that in 2019, the faculties of law, education management are going in for review. And so as Professor Ananda says, the UGC says, okay, we are increasing by maybe 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 students every year who is coming into universities. That's just a number. In my opinion, it should not be a number. It should be one where we are channeling students to the demand-driven programs. So, for example, the Faculty of Dental Sciences is there only in my university at Peradeniya, and they're taking how many? 75 students. Are the teeth of our children in real good health? No, it's not. So how come that the government cannot spend more on dental science education, medical education, engineering education, some science, humanities and social sciences? So as probably the non-state people say, we have to come up with programs which are suitable for our country to make it move forward. After all, we have come through turbulent times and we are actually now picking up, and that pickup should be given by our state sector graduates. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Deepti Bandara. I think having said that, she was actually promoting the state sector education in terms of the quality-wise and so on. I think all of us, majority of us are perhaps state sector education, not perhaps, surely. And it is a challenge for us if you consider, we know that the higher education in non-state sector is necessary to be expanding in Sri Lanka to provide more opportunities for higher education. But we know that their institutions are becoming larger. They become cash rich. They become more investment in the research and so on and so forth. So which means that in future, it will be a challenge for state education. So therefore, I think as Vice Chancellors, Deans of the faculties, all the higher management, we need to, while we like so much expansion of the higher education in Sri Lanka, we need to be ready to compete in a level playing field to face this higher education expansion in the non-state sector. And so the kind of comments that was made, and we might be happy now, but we need to see to the future how we face this non-state higher education expansion being in the government sector, because
Lanka is not good different from the world. They say in the next 5 or 10 years, 1 in 5 aging, right? And affordability in the West to give care. I think we have a wonderful opportunity here, instead of sending these people as housemaids, to upscale these people, you know, to go at a much higher income level. So I think these are mindset issues. I think at policy level you need to...
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Tagaraja. So we need to actually balance out as state universities, and we heard that, you know, universities are not really employment factories in one side, and the other side we need to produce graduates for the employment with the correct attitudes and aptitudes. So we need to really look at all perspectives and to balance out how best we can actually perform our job in the university, so that we make use of the opportunities and face these challenges as to how to overcome. So with that, can I just open up the floor for questions? Yeah, okay. Mr. Saman, already. Can we share a mic, please? One here. Mike, can you?
Thank you, Arif Zaman, London School of Business and Management. Mr. Theagara, I think really welcome your participation on this panel. And I think a couple of years ago had the opportunity of being at your Ceylon Chamber Investment Conclave as part of a Commonwealth trade delegation. The question I want to ask you is really specifically, given something that employers, I think in the UK, said a couple of years ago, but I think this is actually, you know, we hear this echo in different Commonwealth countries, not just in the UK but elsewhere as well, even in places like Pakistan and Seychelles. And the point here is that they were saying that, yes, what we see from graduates coming out, you've got the piece of paper, you've got the technical knowledge, you've got some, you know, but the one thing that you don't seem to have enough of is creativity. And I want to ask this question, not just in a general sense, but in the specific sense that you alluded to, given the changing business landscape that you alluded to with freelancers, the changing business models that we're seeing, the changing product life cycles, all of those things in business, the growth of smaller businesses, the born globals, all of those innovations that are taking place that are rechanging the business landscape, making it probably more challenging for bigger companies like Cargill's and making it easier for smaller operators to compete. So in that changing context, what do you think? Do you think enough is being done in higher education, in particular in 3 areas, to better equip, educate, and enlighten, maybe that's another E for you, another 3 E's, in terms of the student community? And these are the 3 areas I want to channel your sort of views back on. One is in terms of curricula. Okay? I mean, curricula not for the 21st century, but maybe for the 22nd century, because we really need to be thinking much more forward. And this is also asked in the context of One Belt and the infrastructure developments here in Sri Lanka, the knowledge economy, the government's focus on that. The second is in terms of experience. And I don't just mean experience of the people in this room, the staff, I mean the students as well. So it's both the experience during the university environment of students as well as staff. Are we doing enough in terms of broadening that? And the third area, which I think goes to the heart of what the Commonwealth is all about, if I may say, with the ACU here, is inclusiveness. You know, Sri Lanka is a home to many communities, as are many Commonwealth countries. And indeed, you know, we've heard about gender equality. So in terms of inclusive participation, those 3 things, curricula, experience, in terms of inclusive participation, is higher education doing enough to better equip those graduates to respond to the